Imagine a machine of nearly incomprehensible scale. It employs over 4 million people. It controls a nuclear arsenal, guides spacecraft, regulates the food you eat, the air you breathe, and the money you trust. It pays soldiers, supports scientific research, and inspects airplanes. This machine is not a corporation. It's the United States federal government. Now imagine that machine simply stops. This is not a drill for a dystopian novel. This is a U.S. government shutdown, a periodic self-inflicted crisis that, from the outside, seems like political theater. But the reality is far stranger and far more dangerous than most people realize. We've been conditioned to think of it as a temporary hiccup, a paid vacation for bureaucrats. But what if I told you that the shutdown is not a bug in the American system? It's a feature, a deliberately designed failure point, and its true cost is hidden in plain sight. Today, we're not just going to explain what a shutdown is, we're going to unravel the mystery of why a global superpower voluntarily unplugs its own engine, and discover the shocking, cascading consequences that are already affecting your life, your wallet, and your safety, whether you realize it or not. To understand the shutdown, we have to go back, not just a few years or a few decades, but to the very founding of the Republic. The framers of the Constitution were obsessed with one primary fear: the concentration of power. So they built a system of checks and balances: legislative, executive, judicial. Congress holds the power of the purse, the power of the purse. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7 is clear. No money shall be drawn from the treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. In simple terms, the executive branch, the president and all his agencies, cannot spend a single dime unless Congress first passes a law giving them permission. For nearly 2 centuries, this system worked, more or less. Congress would pass a budget, the president would sign it, and the government would be funded. But then, in the late 1960s, something changed. The scale and complexity of the federal government exploded, and Congress, mired in new political gridlock, began to struggle to pass all its spending bills on time. So what happened? Did the government just stop? No. They found a workaround. They would pass short-term funding bills, called continuing resolutions, or CRs. Think of a CR as hitting the snooze button on the government's budget. It just extends the previous year's funding levels for a few weeks or months, buying more time to negotiate. But this created a new problem. What if they couldn't even agree to hit the snooze button? What happens when the clock runs out? The answer arrived in the 1980s. Before this, there was ambiguity. If funding lapsed, agencies would often just keep running, hoping to get paid back later. It was messy. So in 1980 and 1981, then Attorney General Benjamin Civiletti issued a pair of legal opinions that became the bedrock of the modern shutdown. He argued that the 1884 Anti-Deficiency Act, a law designed to prevent overspending, actually made it illegal for the government to operate without funding. This was the twist. A law from the 19th century, intended to promote fiscal responsibility, was now interpreted as a mandate for a total operational shutdown. The ghost was in the machine. The stage was set. All that was needed was the political will to pull the trigger. The first significant shutdowns under this new interpretation were brief, almost experimental. A day in 1981, 2 days in 1984, a single day in 1986. They were skirmishes. But politicians quickly realized they had stumbled upon a weapon of incredible power. It was no longer just about policy disagreements. It was about who could withstand more public pain. The stakes were raised dramatically in 1995. A newly empowered Republican Congress, led by Speaker Newt Gingrich, squared off against Democratic President Bill Clinton. The battle was over: Medicare, education, and the environment. Gingrich and the Republicans were confident. They believed Clinton would fold under pressure. They were wrong. The government shut down not once, but twice. The second shutdown lasted for 21 days, from December 16, 1995 to January 6, 1996. This was no longer a skirmish, it was a siege, and it backfired spectacularly for the Republicans. The public largely blamed them. The image of a petulant Gingrich supposedly complaining about his seating on Air Force One was seared into the public consciousness. Clinton's popularity soared. The lesson was learned. Shutdowns are politically risky. For over 17 years, it became a dormant weapon, a relic of a more combative time. But it was never forgotten. The ceasefire ended in 2013. A new political force, the Tea Party, had risen within the Republican Party. Their target was the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Senator Ted Cruz famously staged a 21-hour filibuster, and the strategy was clear. Use the must-pass funding bill to defund the president's signature achievement. President Obama refused to negotiate. The government shut down for 16 days. This was different from 1995. The target wasn't just budget numbers, it was a specific law that had already been passed, signed, and upheld by the Supreme Court. It was a new level of political hardball, and then, in 2018, we witnessed the unimaginable. The shutdown weapon was used not just for a few days or weeks, but for 35 days, from December 22, 2018 to January 25, 2019. The issue was funding for a border wall. It was the longest shutdown in American history. This was the breaking point. The sheer duration normalized the crisis. News cycles moved on. But for hundreds of thousands of federal employees, it was a month of pure financial terror. They were forced to work without pay or locked out of their jobs entirely. Essential, employees like TSA agents and Coast Guard personnel showed up to protect the nation without knowing when their next paycheck would come. The fallout was no longer just political, it was economic and societal. The Congressional Budget Office estimated it shaved $11 billion from the U.S. economy. Small businesses that relied on government contracts or tourist traffic were devastated. Food safety inspections were scaled back. Airport security lines stretched for hours as TSA agents, working without pay, called in sick. This was the new reality. The shutdown was no longer a political gamble. It was a blunt instrument of coercion with the livelihoods of millions used as collateral. So, why don't we just fix this? The answer is as simple as it is depressing. Because for a small but powerful segment of the political class, the shutdown isn't a failure, it's a success. Think about it from their perspective. A shutdown creates a massive media spotlight. It rallies a political base. It frames the opposition as unreasonable. Fundraising emails during a shutdown are some of the most effective ever written. There is a perverse incentive to create the crisis, not solve it. Over the years, many solutions have been proposed. Automatic continuing resolutions that would keep the government funded at previous levels if no new deal is reached. Bipartisan commissions. But these fail because they remove the very leverage, the threat of a shutdown that politicians have come to rely on. The system is now hardwired for this dysfunction. The cause is hyper-partisanship and a media ecosystem that rewards conflict. The effect is a government that is perpetually on the verge of a catastrophic failure. This is where we move from political theory to your daily life. You might think, I'm not a federal worker. This doesn't affect me. That is the most dangerous assumption of all. The effects are insidious, cumulative, and far-reaching. Let's start with the economy. Every shutdown injects massive uncertainty into the market. It delays permits for businesses, halts federal loans, and stalls critical economic data releases that the Federal Reserve and investors rely on. The 2018-19 shutdown cost the economy $11 billion, according to the CBO. While some of that was recovered, $3 billion was permanently lost. That's money that could have been invested, spent, or saved. Then there's public health and safety. During a shutdown, the FDA suspends most routine food safety inspections. The CDC's ability to track disease outbreaks is hampered. The EPA stops monitoring pollution. The National Transportation Safety Board pauses accident investigations. Think about that. The safety net that you assume is always there, quietly protecting you, develops massive holes. A new flu strain could emerge, and our detection system would be running at half speed. A contaminated food shipment could slip through. And finally, the human capital. The best and brightest don't go into government service for the money. They do it for mission and stability. But what happens when that stability is ripped away every year? They leave. The government is facing a brain drain of epic proportions. The people who design our infrastructure, manage our public lands, and develop our cybersecurity are burning out. The long-term cost is an increasingly hollowed-out, less competent government, and that affects the quality of every service you depend on. And here is the most shocking parallel. This pattern mirrors the decline of other complex systems. We see the same brittle, failure-prone dynamics in our financial markets before 2008 and in aging infrastructure systems. We are introducing systemic risk into the very heart of our nation's operating system. The shutdown isn't just a political event, it's a stress test. And we are failing it over and over again. And so, in the fall of 2025, the specter of a shutdown materialized once again. The scenario was painfully familiar, but this time with a new, more alarming feature. After the 2024 elections, control of Congress shifted to the Republicans, but they lacked the votes in the Senate to pass a budget. The political climate, heated to the limit, left no room for compromise. The main stumbling block was health care. The Democrats, led by Senate Leader Chuck Schumer, refused to support any funding law that did not include the preservation of subsidies under the Affordable Care Act, which were set to expire at the end of the year. They also insisted on reversing funding cuts to Medicaid and key institutions, the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, and the National Institutes of Health, NIH. The Republicans, in turn, led by President Donald Trump, proposed discussing these issues separately and pushed forward with a partisan bill. A meeting at the White House less than 48 hours before the deadline only confirmed the chasm between the two sides. Accusations flew in both directions. Vice President J.D. Vance accused the Democrats of holding the government hostage, while House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries stated that the blame for the shutdown lay solely with the Republicans. But the 2025 shutdown had one sinister distinction. This time, the White House had instructed agencies in advance to prepare not just for a temporary suspension of work, but for possible permanent mass layoffs of personnel deemed non-essential. This meant that approximately 900,000 federal employees were not just sent on unpaid leave. Their jobs were under direct threat. Another 700,000, including air traffic controllers and some health department staff, were forced to work without pay in an environment where the very stability of their careers was in question. This move transformed a habitual political crisis into a personal tragedy for millions of families and an unprecedented act of pressure on the state apparatus. It is this episode from 2025 that vividly demonstrates to what extent this institution has evolved. It is no longer just a weapon in a political fight. It has become a tool for the fundamental restructuring of the state, where the very threat of its existence is used to achieve political goals. And after all this, after another act of political theater where the real extras were the lives of millions, three conclusions seem not just relevant, but inevitable. Takeaway. 1. The shutdown is a choice, not an accident. It is the direct result of a legal interpretation and a political calculation. It is not an unavoidable natural disaster. It is a man-made crisis, engineered and executed. Takeaway 2. The true cost is vastly underestimated. The price tag isn't just back pay for workers or lost park revenue. It's in the eroded public trust, the degraded government capacity, the unseen safety risks, and the permanent economic losses. We are sacrificing long-term resilience for short-term political theater. Takeaway. The incentives are broken. Until we change the political rewards for triggering a crisis and remove the pain from the politicians who cause it, the cycle will continue. The system is working exactly as its current design allows, and that design is flawed. This brings me to the warning. We are playing a dangerous game of chicken with our own stability. Each shutdown normalizes the unthinkable. It lowers the bar for the next one. We are testing the limits of the American system's resilience, and one day, we may find a limit that does not bounce back. A limit that breaks. What happens when a shutdown coincides with a genuine national emergency? A pandemic? A major terrorist threat? A natural disaster? The overlapping crises could be more than our fractured system can handle. The open-ended thought I will leave you with is this. A nation that can voluntarily shut down its own government is a nation that is signaling something profound to its own people and to the world. It is signaling that its political conflicts are more important than its basic functions. It is a luxury that no previous global power could have ever imagined, let alone afforded. How long can we afford it? So, what can you do? The first and most important step is to be informed. To look past the headlines of political gridlock and understand the real-world machinery behind a shutdown. I want you to do one thing today. The next time you see a news story about a potential shutdown, don't just scroll past it. Remember this video. Remember the food inspector, the air traffic controller, the cancer researcher whose work grinds to a halt. Then, contact your representative and your 2 senators. Don't just yell about a specific issue. Ask them a deeper question. What are you doing to fix the system that makes shutdowns possible? Ask them if they support permanent reform, like automatic continuing resolutions, to take this weapon off the table for good. The power of the purse belongs to Congress, but the power of the voice belongs to the people. Use it.